My name is Camila, and I have been a nurse for over 10 years at the Eigth General Hospital. This happened in 2013. I have seen everything in hospitals, but nothing prepared me for that night at the Eigth General Hospital in 2013. It was a Friday, and my shift started at 7 p.m. The hospital was crowded as always. Full corridors, patients lying on makeshift stretchers. The smell of alcohol, sweat, and disinfectant mixed in the air. Doctors ran from one side to the other, while we nurses did our best to keep everything under control. Around 11 p.m., I was called to check on a patient in Wing D, a part of the hospital that should have been deactivated by now. The place was dark, damp, with leaks in the walls. The elevator had not worked for months, so I climbed the stairs, holding my flashlight. When I got to the indicated room, a shiver ran down my spine. The bed was empty. I looked at the clipboard. Patient, Joao Batista, 78 years old. Reason for admission, stroke. The problem? Joao Batista had died 3 days ago. The sound of something dragging in the hallway made me freeze. I walked slowly to the door and looked out. The dim light from the lamps flickered, and a tall, thin shadow moved at the end of the hallway. I could hear heavy breathing and a low murmur, like someone trying to speak, but without a voice. My radio crackled. "Camila, where are you?" It was the voice of my colleague, Clara. I tried to answer, but a shiver made me look back. The bed where Joao should have been now had a figure lying down. Someone was there. My heart raced. I slowly approached and lifted the sheet. Joao's body was there, his eyes open, staring at me. He whispered, "It's not safe here. You got me? He's coming." A loud crash came from the hallway. I ran outside, but the wing looked different, older, dirty, with peeling walls and a musty smell. The lights went out completely. I found myself alone, lost on a floor that shouldn't exist anymore. A low sound, like something scratching the floor, echoed. I looked back and saw a dark figure, with long arms and sunken eyes, crawling towards me. I ran away, without looking back. When I finally managed to reach the stairs and went down to the ground floor, everything seemed normal. I asked the security guard about Wing D. He looked at me scared and said, "This wing was demolished in 2009. You must be tired, Camila. You better go home." But I knew what I had seen. The next day, I checked the hospital records. Joao Batista had really died. And even stranger, his death certificate said he passed away in Ward D in 2009. I have never been up to that floor since that night. But sometimes, in the silence of the hospital, I still hear whispers coming from what must be a non-existent floor. My name is Eduardo. I've been an Uber driver since 2018. This happened to me in downtown Rio de Janeiro in 2019. I've had strange, drunk, aggressive passengers, but nothing compares to what happened that night in August 2019. It was almost 3 a.m. I was already tired and thought about calling it a night, but one last ride showed up, a passenger named Rodrigo, picking up at the Cajas Cemetery and going to Gloria. I thought it was strange. Who orders an Uber in the middle of a cemetery at this time? But I accepted. I arrived at the location and parked near the main gate. The place was silent, shrouded in a light fog. No sign of Rodrigo. I waited a few minutes until a tall, thin man in a black suit came out from behind the cemetery wall and walked to the car. He opened the door and got into the back seat. His face was pale, and he wore sunglasses even in the early hours of the morning. "Good evening, Eduardo. Thanks for picking me up." His voice was low, almost a whisper. The smell of wet earth filled the car as he got in. I started driving. The silence in the car was suffocating. I tried to make conversation. "Tough night, huh? It too long?" He replied without taking his eyes off the road. I started to notice him in the rearview mirror. Rodrigo was stiff, his hands folded in his lap. His skin looked strange, as if it were made of wax. With about 5 minutes to go until we reached our destination, the GPS went crazy. The route changed on its own and now sent me to a dead end in Gloria. "You can go this way." I know a shortcut. The back of my neck tingled. I knew I shouldn't go, but for some reason my arms wouldn't respond. The car turned in the direction indicated by itself. The alley was dark, surrounded by old buildings. I looked in the rearview mirror, but Rodrigo was no longer there. I turned around. The seat was empty, but the smell of earth still permeated the car. The Uber radio rang. It was a new call. I looked at the screen and froze. Rodrigo, same profile, picking up at Codge's cemetery, heading to Gloria. I sped away from there and never accepted a ride near cemeteries again. To this day, when I pass by Kaju in the early hours of the morning, I swear I see a man in a black suit on the sidewalk, waiting for a car that never arrives. That was the second one. Did you like it? Can I send you the next one? My name is Marcos, and I have been a military police officer for over 15 years. I have faced life or death situations, but nothing prepared me for what I experienced during an operation in Morro do Fogueteiro in Rio Comprido in 2011. It was dawn when my team and I were called to investigate a report of bodies buried in an abandoned part of the hill, known as Bico do Silencio. According to reports, residents heard whispers and moans coming from the place every night. We climbed carefully, weapons in hand. The place was dark, full of abandoned houses, graffitied walls, and scattered trash. When we arrived at the indicated point, I felt a strong shiver. The air was heavy still, as if time there was not passing. The sergeant ordered us to start digging. One of the soldiers hit the ground with his shovel, and the sound was hollow. Something was buried there. After a few minutes of digging, the stench of rotting flesh took over the place. We found a shallow grave with 3 bodies, already decomposing. But that wasn't what made us run. That's what happened next. A cold wind blew out of nowhere, and the radios started to crackle. Then we heard it, a voice, weak, low, inside the grave. "Help, I'm still here." Everyone froze. One of the soldiers, desperate, pointed his flashlight into the hole. One of the corpses turned its head in our direction. We left as quickly as possible. We reported everything, but the next day, when we returned with the forensics team, the bodies were no longer there. Only the dug hole, as if there had never been anything there. The locals say that Bico do Silencio was an old drug trafficking dumping ground. They also say that the dead there never rest. Since that night, no one has set foot in that alley after dark. My name is Julia, and I've been a lifeguard in Copacabana since 2015. Every day, the sea is a mystery. I've saved several people, but there's one story that always haunts me, and it happened in 2017 on a summer afternoon. It was 5:30 p.m., and the beach was crowded, as usual. The heat was unbearable, and the waves were rougher than usual. I was on the observation tower, looking intently at the sea, when I noticed a man swimming far from the shore. He seemed panicked, struggling against the waves. I ran to the board and asked other lifeguards for help. When I got to him, the man was almost drowning. He was a middle-aged man with glassy eyes, and his skin was pale, as if he had been underwater for days. "It's okay, calm down. I'll help you." I pulled him onto the board, and we started heading back to the sand. But as we moved away from the wave area, the water became strangely cold. He didn't say anything, just stared out to sea. That was when, suddenly, a huge wave formed behind us. The current dragged us along, pulling us down. The man began to struggle again, but with impossible strength for someone in his condition. In a desperate attempt, I tried to swim faster, but the waves were stronger. The man, with a muffled scream, sank all at once, disappearing into the water. We managed to get back to the sand, but panic was still in my chest. I went back to the tower, and minutes later, the radio called me. "Julia, who was that man? No one saw him coming." That sentence froze me. I went to the lifeguard station and asked about him. No one at the station recognized him. None of the other lifeguards had seen the man swimming. I went to the medical center, but there was no record of anyone matching that profile. The police arrived, did a search, but found nothing. The strangest thing. The next day, when I was working my shift, I noticed a photo on the wall. A photo from 1997 of a man who had drowned right there in Copacabana during a day of rough seas. He was identical to the man I saved. I have never seen that man again since that day. But some nights, when I walk along the shore, I hear the sound of a muffled scream coming from the sea, and I always feel the cold wind that it brought with it. Supernatural phenomena are always around us. They just need the right moment to manifest. First of all, I would like to say that until this event, I had never seen or heard anything strange. I live in Duque de Caxias, in Rio de Janeiro. I even joke that I am spiritually blind and deaf. My brother, on the other hand, has seen a lot of strange things. Well, my husband, my son, and I want to spend Carnival in Cabo Frio with my brothers. One beautiful night, I was alone at home. Everything was going normally when at a certain point the doorbell rang. The night was beautiful and the moon lit up the entire path to the gate. It turns out that there was a tree next to it that cast shadows over the place. When I was halfway there, my brother, who had rung the doorbell, remembered that he had the key and let himself in. He walked in front, my sister behind, her husband after, and finally a figure that I could see was female and had long hair down to her waist. I thought it was Ana Lucia, a friend of ours who had beautiful long hair. My brother came over to where I was, and I came back talking to him. My sister and brother-in-law passed me, but I didn't see Ana pass by, and I turned to greet her. When I turned around, there was no one there, so I asked my brother, "Where's Anna?" To which he replied that he didn't know about her, that she wasn't with them. At that moment, I remembered something. Anna had cut her hair to her shoulders, and that person who had entered through the gate with my brother couldn't be her. And at the same time, she had disappeared. Who was the woman who entered through the gate with them then? Where did she come from? Where did she go? And what did she want by following everyone? I was scared by that, and that fact was the first and only strange thing I've seen in my life, and I intend for it to stay that way. My brother even joked with me. Now you know how I feel. My name is Patricia, and in 2015 I worked as a saleswoman in a clothing store at the Novo America shopping mall in Del Castillo. I always loved my job, but after that night, I could never set foot in that place alone again. It was a Tuesday, the end of the workday. My colleagues had already left, and I was left closing the cash register. The store was empty, and the mall was almost completely closed. That's when I heard the doorbell ring. I looked up and saw a man standing at the entrance. He was tall, thin, wearing an old, somewhat yellow dress shirt and black pants. He didn't look wet, but a strong smell of sewage filled the store as soon as he entered. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound normal. He didn't answer. He just walked slowly to the suit section and started running his fingers through the fabrics, as if he was looking for something. I watched him. He didn't look at me or the mirrors. His face seemed blurred, as if the mall lights weren't illuminating him properly. The store's radio crackled, and the security guard's voice came in a clipped voice. "Patricia, are you still there?" I went to the counter to get the radio, without taking my eyes off the man. "Yes, I am. There's still a customer here." Silence. Then the answer came cold. "Patricia, get out of the store. Now." My hand shook. I looked at the man. He was now staring at me, and his eyes were completely black. The radio crackled again. "Patricia, he's behind you. Run!" My blood ran cold. I didn't have the courage to turn around. I could only take a step back, and I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I ran out, leaving everything behind. The security guards found me minutes later, pale and shaking. When we returned to the store, it was empty. They checked the security cameras the next day. No one came into the store after 10 p.m. Only me. But I know what I saw. And to this day, some employees say they can smell a strong sewage smell near the store, always before closing. Hello. Before I tell you my story, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, okay? Okay. I'm 18 now, but when this happened, I was 11 or something close to that, maybe older. But no matter how old I was, I remember it as if it had just happened. Well, what I'm going to write now was not written to impress anyone, but it's simply what really happened. Whether you believe it or not doesn't really matter to me. But I know some of you believed it, smiley face. My family, my mother, my younger brother and sister, and I had been living with my grandparents for a few years. We had left our old house because of a terrible rat infestation that no matter what kind of poison, my mother tried very strong ones. You put in, it didn't work. There were more and more rats in the house. My mother, who always wanted to have her own house to decorate and arrange however she wanted, searched and searched and searched. She never found anything that suited her. They were either too expensive or not big enough for all of us, or they were falling apart. Finally, she found what she wanted, a house with enough space for all of us at a very affordable price. She paid the down payment on the house and was over the moon to have her own place. The house was really spotless, but for some reason we were the only ones who wanted it. No one else showed much interest. After we all moved in, being the curious kids that we were, we asked her why it was so cheap. She simply replied with all the naivety and honesty in the world. It was cheap because the previous owner who lived here died in it. None of us believed in ghosts, and no one knew what he had died of. So it seemed like we were just lucky. We made friends with the kids in the area and had lots of kid-friendly adventures, usually going where we weren't supposed to go, thinking we were some kind of great adventurers. It took about 2 or 3 years before the weird stuff started happening. They were small things that sometimes went unnoticed, but they were strange. All the kitchen cabinets opened and closed by themselves, and they did it all the time. It wasn't fast and violent like in horror movies, but they did it very slowly, as if they were too old to stay still. So my mother called a carpenter to fix the cabinets, but he said there was nothing wrong with them. So over time we simply started to ignore it and lived with them doing it without thinking that there could be a ghost there doing it. Then the front door started doing this. We would see the doorknob turn and the door would open. We thought the doorknob might be broken, and it didn't do that when the door was locked, so we ended up ignoring that too. This ghost must have been very annoyed with our ignorance in noticing it, but it kept trying. My younger brother's bedroom door did the same thing, and he was about 6 years old, so it ended up scaring him. He thought the boogeyman was out to get him. The doors that did this the most were my mother's bedroom door, my brother's bedroom door, and the bathroom door. But despite all this, we lived a normal life. with our closets and doors that we opened and closed all the time. Then scarier things started to happen. I remember sleeping in my sister's room, on the bottom bunk bed, and I woke up to my mother screaming. I jumped out of bed, woke my sister up, and then the two of us went to get my brother and told him to come with us. When the three of us got to my sister's room, her boyfriend, who often spent time with us, was standing at the door asking her what was going on. My mother was sitting on the bed, screaming, "There's a man in the house. Go get him, Marcos. He wants to kill my children." Then she went quiet and looked at the foot of her bed with a strange expression on her face. "Where did you see him?" Marcos, her boyfriend, asked. "He was at the foot of my bed, and he was trying to talk to me, but then I started yelling and throwing things at him. But nothing hit him, and then he disappeared." Marcos looked at her face and said she was going crazy. I told her that she must be having a nightmare, and that it was nothing serious, and she agreed with me. But in truth, I believed her. I had only said that to calm her down. The next morning I asked her what the man she had seen looked like. She didn't say anything and refused to talk about it, and I thought that was very strange. But at the time I had no idea that it could be the previous owner of the house she had seen. A few days later the phone, the only thing I could hear was the person's breathing. Hello? Just breathing. "Who is it? Do you want to talk to my mom?" I asked. The breathing got louder, and whoever it was hung up. My mom was in the shower and asked who it was, and I told her what had happened. She told my brothers and I not to answer the phone, and asked some neighbors if they had seen anyone following her kids. My mom is pretty paranoid when it comes to us. The phone kept ringing for a while longer, and finally my mom lost it and started yelling and cursing into the phone, threatening to call the police. 2 days passed without the phone ringing, but then someone knocked on the door. My mom asked who it was, but got no answer. So she opened the door. It was a guy with blonde hair, starting to turn white and blue eyes, wearing a white shirt and brown pants. "Where's John?" he asked as he peered inside the house. "No one lives here with that name. You're in the wrong house." My mother was about to close the door, but he held it open with his hand. "This is the right house," he said firmly, but politely. I know this because I was standing near the door watching everything. "If you don't leave now, I'm going to call the police," my mother shouted. The man simply pushed the door open, firmly but politely, until there was enough space for him to stick his head inside the house. And then he started yelling, "John, where are you? John, I know you're there. John." My mother was furious at this. She pushed him as hard as she could, and he fell to the floor sitting down, and then she slammed the door shut and locked it. "Wasn't John the name of the guy who lived here before us? You should have told me he died." I said, "Yeah, the man's name was John, and I don't know how this guy knew his name, but I think he was a thief who wanted to rob us. But you don't have to worry about that." She patted me and continued washing the dishes. I left the house through the back door and slowly walked to the kitchen door, but there was no one there, not even on the floor, and no sign of anyone having been there. I told my younger brother and a friend of ours, and the three of us sat on his swing trying to figure out the mystery. After that, the phone call started again. Then, one night, something happened that made me start believing in ghosts. I was sleeping, but then out of nowhere, I woke up, and standing in the middle of my room, there was a man. He was tall and wearing a suit, like a lawyer. His hair was completely black and cut very short, and his eyes were very blue. I could see him clearly, as if he were in the sun, even though it was already past midnight, and my room was as dark as a cave. I still didn't think he was a ghost. My first thought was, "OH my God, a thief." I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out, and all I could do was sit there and stare at him. He smiled at me and held out his right hand and said, his voice sounded like a normal person's, "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you. It was kind of weird, but I felt calmer after he said that, even though my voice was still cracking. "I'm John. What's your name?" As if he had control of my voice, I managed to speak again, but it was low and calm. "My name is Anna." He smiled even more, and then he disappeared. One moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. He was gone in the blink of an eye. I immediately regained my strength and my voice, and then I got out of bed and reached out, feeling around in the air for where the man was. I searched the hallway, the living room, the bedrooms, the entire house, and there was no one else there. Now I was 100% sure that I had seen a ghost, and I was sure that it was the same thing my mother had seen beside her bed. So, in the middle of the night, I went to her room and explained what had happened. "Tell me what the man you saw looked like." I made her tell me before I told her what I had seen. And guess what? She described exactly the man I had seen. I asked if it was John, and she nodded. And that is my story. I know it's nothing too wonderful, scary, or interesting, but it really happened. And why did he decide to show himself to me? I have no idea. Maybe it was because out of all the children, I was the only one who thought that ghosts were something my grandfather had invented to scare me. I've had another encounter, but that's another story.